Hello, welcome back. After a long extended break, I'm finally back here playing some solo D&D. Before we continue with this current adventure, which was on the precipice of being a complete disaster, as I recall, I wanted to discuss a couple of things to get into perspective what this whole exercise is about. This is more of a sort of tracking the points in my own head and discussing them out loud to see if any ideas generate. I realize at this stage there are very few viewers of this, and those of you who have taken a look at what I'm doing, thank you for that. But it's low effort and not particularly engaging, I imagine, and that's something that maybe will develop in the future. But right now, this is more of a personal project of mine, and anybody that does watch it who manages to sit through and endure my ramblings and my slow and fairly unenergetic discussions and play. Well, if you're enjoying it, I'm not quite sure why, but thank you anyway. So, recently, I've been looking at a couple of things. One thing that's been on my radar for a long time is a system called E6. What that is, it's not a book that you can purchase or anything. It is just an idea of how to deal with D&D or indeed Pathfinder, because there's an E6 for Pathfinder as well. And that is basically the premise that characters cap at 6th level, and then they can, as they sort of like continue to gain experience after 6th level, they can get additional feats, but all the abilities and everything that characters gain from 7th level onwards are unattainable. That mostly is dealing with the spells for wizards and clerics and such, because once you get 4th level spells, the game changes into a completely different thing. I think it is. I think that's correct anyway. 4th level at level 7. One of the biggest problems I have that I experienced in my own game recently is you start to experience spells that break the game in terms of let's say that you've got an adventure written, and let's say that you have actually made it fairly linear, which every DM is told not to make linear adventures, but sometimes there are a certain sequence of events that you want to try and do, and you'll have a boss at the end of your dungeon or whatever. And by the time you get to 4th level, I find that players are able to sort of circumvent the adventure and go places where you're not expecting, cause a lot of problems. One of the worst culprits of this isn't actually a 4th level spell. It's Fly, which is a 3rd level spell. And Fly, I think, it ruins the game because it causes so many problems. Not just circumventing adventures, but when you have a system like 3rd edition or Pathfinder that is so reliant on grid for combat, Fly adds that extra dimension that just slows the game down that little bit more. You sometimes have to deal with it if you've got flying enemies, dragons and such, but players tend to, I don't know, cause additional problems. Anyway, that's by the by. E6 is cool because level 6 means that you will cap out at that level, and what it incentivizes is maybe a slower progression, that the players will spend more time at each level. Players always want experience and to level up as quickly as possible, and I think that rewards should be given in different manners, whether that's through treasure or renown or completing story arcs. Making it so that players spend a little bit more time on each level savoring things, I think, just adds to the game in some way. So I don't have any big thoughts on it yet. I'm looking into it, thinking about how the game would look if you only go up to 6th level. I feel like that's exactly what I would like out of it. But what are you missing out on if you do E6? There's a huge amount of abilities that characters have that you'll never get to see. Some of the part of the rules for E6 is that there are certain feats that unlock higher level abilities for characters. Normally, whatever the character gets at 7th level, you can unlock them with a feat at 6th level. So there is probably a way of introducing some of the higher level things into the game so that the players get to experience them. But I would have to look at what the players are getting at those higher levels that can be incorporated into the characters earlier on. And obviously there's a bunch of spells that are being missed out upon. Some of those can be incorporated as sort of rituals. They're maybe very difficult to get hold of the scrolls to cast such spells, and they require hours or days of casting. And I think that's one way that you can add in some of these much higher level spells and make it more interesting, make it more of a story thing. That they're very powerful, these spells. They take time to get hold of. They take time to cast, and once you've cast them, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to cast them again. So you can make a story point out of specific spells, where I don't think that doesn't really happen in games, as far as I know, that a plot will revolve around a specific spell, especially if you're playing one of these games where the players have access to everything via SRD or whatever. The other thing that you'll miss out on, and I think that this just happens in general, let's bear in mind that most campaigns end before level 10. The average, I believe, is around level 8 that a campaign ends. And for my own Pathfinder campaign, that's exactly where it ended at level... No, we ended at level 10. Where I found that running the game was almost unmanageable, mainly because of the wizard. And I'm sure that's the situation with most players. Wizards cause the biggest problems because they prolong fights with summons. They're flying around everywhere. They're breaking your monsters. They're scrying on things, finding out the answers to everything before you want them to. So wizards tend to break the game at higher levels. So anyway, we ended the Pathfinder campaign at level 10. And there is a whole host of monsters that you will never get to see. The principle of these are dragons. I find in my experience that few games will have the low challenge rating dragons because they're too small, and I don't know, it seems like a warm-up or somewhat comical. You want to have that battle against the big, huge dragon that flies in the sky, and you have to get out of its way. Like Smaug coming to attack Lake Town. That's what people want when they have a dragon in the game. And your characters need to be at an extremely high level for that to happen. And by the time that happens, you're not going to have the situation of a dragon flying into the town, burning down houses, and then you hope for that lucky shot from Bard. based on the information that that Smaug has a small gap in his underbelly. No, you'll have high-level characters teleporting around, flying, summoning other creatures, and it will turn into somewhat of a fiasco, I reckon. And then it's the brute strength of the dragon that's going to resolve the situation. This is speaking in very general terms. There could be a lot of DMs that are more clever with their monsters, and the final battle with the dragon will have occurred after the dragon's used a bunch of other abilities in different situations and no actual fight has occurred. But for the people who are looking through the monster manual to try and find challenge ratings that match their party, because remember, the whole game is designed around this matching of challenge ratings to make the encounters doable by the players, but not too overpowering and not too easy. It's a very sort of mathematical way of doing things. You're not going to see some of these, a challenge rating 18 dragon. It's not going to show up because you can't put that against players until they are at least 15th level. If it's the boss, then it should be three levels of challenge above the party's average level. So if you're playing E6 and you're capping out at 6th level, then the last adventures that the players go on, the bosses that they're going to be encountering are going to be maximum, let's say, 10. Now, there's a lot of monsters being missed out on there. For one, the most obvious that I found was the Beholder. I've seen very few games with the Beholder in it, and that's a very iconic monster, but its challenge rating is quite high, I think. At least 2/3 of the dragons are missing. So you're either going to fight, let's say, a white or a black dragon, who I believe are the weakest ones. Maybe you'll be able to fight a large one of those. But otherwise, if you want to fight a red dragon, it's going to be horse-sized, which, if you encountered in real life, probably would be quite scary. But in the scope of the game, when you're representing it on the board, probably that dragon won't look particularly intimidating. I don't know. So it's one of the things that I'm thinking about with E6 is how much are you going to miss out on monsters? And this is only considering the fact that, those challenge rating 6 monsters, let's say, you're only supposed to really be fighting 1, or maybe, if it's a bad day, 2 of those sort of thing. Maybe some of those monsters are iconic enough, or they would seem appropriate if they were in a group of 10 or something, and then you'll never be able to have a fair encounter with that. So that's what I'm looking into at the moment. I've got a thought in my mind of how do you distill all 20 levels down into 6 so the progression doesn't go too high. Let's say you keep the base attack and the save bonus progression exactly as they are, level 1 to 6, but all of the abilities that you might get from level 1 to 20, you kind of condense them down into the 6 levels. Let's take an example of, I don't know, the Ranger from 3rd edition. The Ranger gets 5 favoured enemies through levels 1 to 20. Well, what would happen if he got those 5 favoured enemies through levels 1 to 6? Would that be overpowered? Would it be uninteresting? What is the effect that would actually have? The same goes for, let's say, the Paladin. Well, he's gotten almost everything until level 6, up to remove disease, and then he can just do remove disease more often once he reaches level 6. But something like the Monk, well, that's gonna suffer a lot, I think, in terms of balance, because the Monk starts to come into its own much later on. And so all of these abilities that the monk has got, there's a lot of them after level 6. Is there some way of cramming those into the first 6 levels at a reduced power? And if you are combining all these abilities into the first 6 levels for players, are then the spellcasters going to miss out by not having higher level spells? Anyway, that's something I'm thinking about, because overall the whole point of this is I'm trying to find a preferred system. I'm trying to find the best kind of system to really commit to. I mean, in terms of what's on my bookshelf, the biggest amount of books that I've got are for 3rd edition, and that is the first system that I played, so there is nostalgia for it and it's my preferred system. But is it the best? And are all of the issues that are talked about online valid for most games, or are they only... There's always balance issues talked about. Is that applicable only from levels 1 to 20? Is it such a big issue? Is it so unbalanced? That's what I'm trying to decide. I've been playing a lot of old school Essentials and OSR style games, and I quite like them. The thing that I like the most is the ability to quickly improvise, because there are much fewer stats to deal with. There is simplified combat. Everything is simplified. But it's missing out on some things. Some of the skill-related stuff it's missing out on. It's missing out on a lot of spells. There's a bunch of abilities that I'd like to put in, and I think that the differentiation between monsters is lacking there maybe as well, somewhat. So there needs to be a middle ground, and maybe that middle ground is 5th edition. But I'm not very happy with 5th edition from what I've played so far. And there is a conflict of reports I've heard about it, in that some people really like it, some people dislike it greatly. There's one guy in the group that I play with who just refuses to play 5th edition because there's not enough options in it, I think, is his main argument, which I think that that's a poor argument for players in general, because I think there's too many options in most of the games, and I don't think that options in mechanical abilities are as important as options that you create through role-playing or from equipment or whatever. But I don't know if I'm correct in that. So there we have it. I'm trying to work out the best system. I'm sticking with 3rd edition as well, and I'm trying to currently go through 3.0 here. Then later maybe make a little bit of a comparison between 3.0 and 3.5. See what was working, what was not, because I'm presuming that there is a bit of a hangover of things that were standard practice within like 1st and 2nd edition that still made their way into 3rd edition, and then 3rd edition became a little bit more oriented on the grid and maybe had a little bit of influence from video games. I don't know. Speaking of 2nd edition and 1st edition AD&D as well, those two systems I haven't really delved into yet. Maybe they will answer my questions, I don't know. I'm planning on getting the 1st edition rulebooks at some point, but they look like they're going to be a long read, and I don't know if I want to delve into that system yet. So there are my thoughts on things. I'm going to separate this video into a separate sort of discussion one, and then get on with the rest of the adventure after this. But I'm trying to distill my thoughts on this and come up with an idea of what's the purpose of what I'm doing, and what do I want out of the game. And, well, do do these explorations in the system benefit me? Or do I just want to do some solo playing and what am I getting enjoyment out of this for? I'm not sure yet, and that's an interesting point. I will say, in addition, I picked up a couple of solo guides. So one is called DM Yourself, which is focused on 5th edition, but it looks like it's going to have a bunch of good points in it. I've only briefly scanned through it at the moment and printed off a couple of interesting bits. I also picked up the Mythic system, which I heard a lot about. That one doesn't look like it's going to have as much useful stuff in it, but I need to take a bigger look at it. And what I want to do is, because we're missing out on the role-playing side of things with these solo games, and I want to try and develop a system that allows me to role-play a little bit better, because role-playing with yourself is somewhat of a strange exercise to undertake. So some kind of dice rolling needs to occur. And whether that is generating tables of possible responses based upon the characteristics of the characters. I don't know if such a thing already exists out there somewhere, whether that's something I need to make for myself, but I need to generate some sort of mechanical way of resolving the role-playing side of stuff, because just talking to myself, as aside from what I'm already doing right now, but I mean having the conversations between two characters to myself seems like it's going to be fairly redundant, and it's not going to be interesting either. There needs to be an element of randomness for some kind of discussion or something that's completely unforeseen. So there are my thoughts on it, and my next video will be the next section of this slightly challenging adventure.